Statement, the Prime Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on last week's European Council.
We are here discussing the European Summit.
On last week's European Council.
The House must calm itself, taking whatever medicaments are required for the purpose.
I made it clear that if the Eurozone countries wanted a treaty involving all 27 members of the European Union, we would insist on some safeguards for Britain to protect our own national interests. Satisfactory safeguards were not forthcoming, and so I did not agree to the treaty.
There was no draft treaty before the European Council last Thursday and Friday. There was a set of draft conclusions.
Let me be clear about exactly what happened, what it means for Britain, and what I see happening next. So the question at the Council was not whether there should be greater fiscal discipline in the Eurozone, but rather how that should be achieved. There were two possible outcomes: either a treaty of all 27 countries with proper safeguards for Britain, or a separate treaty in which Eurozone countries and others would pool their sovereignty on an intergovernmental basis, with Britain maintaining its position in the single market and in the European Union of 27 members. Now, of course, an intergovernmental arrangement is not without risks. The choice was a treaty without proper safeguards or no treaty, and the right answer was no treaty.
There was no draft treaty before the European Council last Thursday and Friday. There was a set of draft conclusions.
If Britain had agreed treaty change,
he claimed in his statement to have done what he did because this treaty posed a grave threat to our financial services industry. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, claimed to have wielded a veto.
There was no draft treaty.
Lord, I'm worried about the health of the honourable member for Mid Sussex. He must calm himself. Have a lie down if necessary while we listen to the Leader of the Opposition.
Just calm down, Mr. Speaker. We will rue the day this Prime Minister left Britain alone, without allies, without influence.
a lot of sound and fury, but one crucial weakness. He hasn't told us whether he would sign up to the new treaty. He asked what we gained from the veto. I'll tell you what we gained from the veto. We stopped Britain signing up to a treaty without any safeguards. That's what we gained. The honourable gentleman cannot answer is, does he back this treaty or not?
There was no draft treaty before the European Council.
So for all the right honourable gentleman's experience, I think he's very naive about what is happening in Europe over financial services. There is time. There would be a threat if there was a treaty of the 17 in the European Union without the proper safeguards, and that is why I vetoed that approach. And the veto is there for a purpose if you feel your national interests aren't being protected. And it's very important we maintain that in the EU.
Mr. Austin Mitchell.
I'm not going to criticise the Prime Minister for using his veto, because that's a job that can safely be left to his Liberal Democrat colleagues hawking their consciences round the media. But surely he would have done better to use the big bazooka later, when the undemocratic and deflationary consequences of this Merkozy diktat become clear, because at that stage he'd have had lots of allies which he should have had now and used now.
There was no draft treaty before the European Council last Thursday and Friday. There was a set of draft conclusions.
Upton Brown.
Stated by right honourable friend, he had no option but to use his veto if British interests would be protected.
Mr. Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Europe wouldn't be in the economic and political mess it's in now if we hadn't had to wait for nearly 40 years before a British Prime Minister came back and said he or she had used the veto. Can the Prime Minister tell us how he is going to, and when, he is going to repatriate some of those powers that have been so carelessly given away?
Mr. Speaker, we are hearing from outside this House an answer that the Leader of the Opposition wouldn't give on whether he would have signed or not signed the veto last Thursday. His aides are saying that he would have not signed it. Can the Prime Minister press him further to give us an answer on whether he would or would not have signed the veto last Thursday?
I'm very grateful my honourable friend has been looking at Twitter or whatever else it is that the Leader of the Opposition now uses. I gather, Mr. Speaker, it is possible for the Leader of the Opposition to come back and perhaps he could confirm now whether he's going to say that he would or wouldn't have signed this treaty. I'm very happy to have a few more minutes if we got a bit of clarity from the Leader of the Labour Party.
There was no draft treaty before the European Council last Thursday and Friday. There was a set of draft conclusions.
Mr. Speaker, those great former Labour politicians, Peter Shaw and Brian Gould, both said that the single currency would fail, and they've been proved absolutely right. Would the Prime Minister not accept that the choice in reality is between a controlled deconstruction of the euro or an uncontrolled crash? And will he make this point to his European colleagues?
Because without the long-delayed and still unpromised massive support of the European Central Bank and the Bundesbank, the euro is doomed. And yes, doomed. And as Chancellor Merkel has said, the European Union with it.
Well, let me repeat again to the right honourable gentleman that I do believe it's in Britain's interest to be in the European Union and to be active, particularly on those dossiers where it's in our interest.
Chris Heaton-Harris.
The UK wields its influence in the EU in many different ways, and our net contribution to the EU in 2010-11 was 9.2 billion. We're the second largest net contributor. Perhaps we could become a bit more like the unions with Labour and demand a bit more influence for our money.
The honourable gentleman makes a good point, which is that we are a major player in the European Union, not least because we are the second largest net contributor, and that does give us a huge amount of influence. And what we've done is safeguard the European Union and its treaties, not allowing those to be changed if we weren't able to get the safeguards we needed.
Willie.
Given that we are the second largest contributor to Europe, would the Prime Minister agree with me that without our contribution, Europe would actually fail?
Well, it does mean that we have a huge amount of influence in the EU and that we do drive, particularly in the area of single market policies. But of course, he makes the point we have to make sure we are getting value for money, and that's why I'm so keen that we managed to achieve a freeze in the EU budget this year. Britain remains a full member of the European Union, and the events of the last week do nothing to change that. Our membership of the EU is vital to our national interest. We are a trading nation and we need the single market for trade, investment and jobs. The EU makes Britain a gateway to the largest single market in the world for investors. It secures half our exports and millions of British jobs. And membership of the EU strengthens our ability to progress foreign policy objectives too, giving us a strong voice on the global stage on issues such as trade and, as we have seen at Durban this week, climate change and the environment as well. So we are in the European Union and we want to be. So we are in the European Union and we want to be.